This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Chris Graham. It is a Wednesday. Flying solo today. I was going to try to talk with Scott German, my usual partner in crime. One of my usual partners in crime anyway. But Scott, not able to join us today. We'll be talking tomorrow with Jeff Fife. And Jeff and I will talk some UVA sports, some pro wrestling, some other things. But today we're going to do some more sports, and I'm going to do it by myself. Feeling better. Hey, this is good news. I mean, I've been... if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I've been dealing with bronchitis and a flu off and on since Thanksgiving, and you've dealt with me coughing at times during podcasts, etc. Thank you for doing so. I want to be positive. I think I'm better. My wife is, as at my recording studio, she's a couple rooms away. She's now got the worst of it, so. The Graham household is still dealing with it, but we've all gotten through. I mean, it doesn't matter where you live in the United States. Listening to this, if you're in the States, you have dealt with not only this horrible flu season. I mean, whether you've had it yourself or family members or coworkers, the flu is at an all-time worst from everything you read and see on TV. Also, the cold. I mean, I don't know that it's coincidence that we had that record cold snap for a couple of weeks. Really, again, across much of the country. I mean, even Florida was having issues. Good friend Mark Moses down in central Florida was waking up to freezing temperatures. And so we're out of the woods as far as that goes. Hopefully, again, the flu, for me at least, is getting away. And we can now finally get into 2018. Here it is, what's today, January 10th? And I'm still just getting into the swing of things here in this year 2018. 2017 with a vengeance. So it didn't want to end, I guess, that terrible year 2017. So let's start where we left off last night. Scott German and I covered the UVA Syracuse game. Number 3, Virginia, with a 68-61 win over the Orange. And, if you read Augusta Free Press, you knew that my feeling going into that game, if you're a Virginia fan, was that it was going to be a tight game, despite the records. I know Syracuse had entered the game with a 1-3 record in the ACC. They were coming off a couple straight losses, including a home loss to Notre Dame last weekend. And so on paper, you get the number 3 team in the country against a team that's 1-3 in the conference. That should be a relatively easy game, especially at home for the number 3 team. But Syracuse matches up so well with Virginia. They will play a rematch later this season up in the Carrier Dome. But Syracuse, the way Virginia plays and the way they beat a lot of the teams they play is because, Coach Tony Bennett, his style of ball, both on the offensive end and defensive end, wears teams out. Because Virginia, on the defensive end, of course, they run the pack line defense. And you've heard the term pack line defense. And if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially it's a man defense with some zone principles. Each of the defenders are responsible for sort of covering an area of the floor, keeping the offensive team out of a 16-foot sort of semicircle around the rim. But then they're also playing man, and ball handlers when an opponent tries a high pick and roll with a big. Generally, that's what you do a high pick and roll with, is with a big. The Virginia big will double team the ball handler to get the ball out of his hands. Guys slide over and take care of the cutters, so you get very few pick and roll actions. When the ball's dumped into the post, Virginia actually post-to-post doubles. They don't double with the guard dropping down and leaving an open shooter. They'll actually have the other post defender run across the lane and double the ball out of the hands of the post. So it's really hard to get a lot of easy shots. They'll give you a contested jump shot, 3-point shot, but so they'll make you work there, and then the mover blocker offense that Tony Bennett uses also makes you work. So you're working so hard to get a shot off, even much less a good shot on your offensive end. On your defensive end, Virginia runs this constant motion offense. The 2 forwards are setting screens constantly in this offense, and then they're either cutting off those or popping off those. The 3 movers, as they're called, the guards in the offense, are either flaring off or setting up for perimeter shots or occasionally dribble drives. Not a lot of dribble drives, but occasional dribble drives. And so you're working for 20, 25 seconds to play defense. Then you go down. You have to work for 20, 25, 30 seconds to get a shot. You do this all game long, and it just wears you out. Well, Syracuse doesn't have that issue, at least on the defensive end. They still have to, or on their defensive end, when they're playing their 2-3 zone, their guys can sit in that zone and they play it well. It's not like, some teams play a 2-3 zone. Duke's playing a 2-3 zone a lot this year because they're just not playing good defense. And so at least they can mask their horrible man-to-man defense with a tepid 2-3 zone. Coach Jim Boeheim has been coaching this 2-3 zone for 40 years, and he staffs it well. He recruits to it. He has height all the way across that zone. His team this year, the smallest guy on the floor is 6'5". He's got 2 6'9" wings. He's got a 7'2" center. So if you do get inside, you get some shots blocked by the 7'2" center. You got any zone defense is going to at least give you an opportunity for an open 3-point shot, but they'll close out with 6'9" guys. So it's really tough, and and then really on their offensive end, they don't really run a lot of plays. It's a lot of dribble drive action. It's a lot of ISO and that kind of thing. And so they don't get as worn out as everyone else who plays Virginia. So as a result, that advantage that Virginia goes into almost every time out there kind of goes away. And so it's not quite kryptonite, but it kind of takes away a big selling point of Tony Bennett's unique approach, both offensively and defensively. At least it evens the playing field. And now, of course, Virginia kind of does the same thing to Syracuse. I mean, they go into a lot of games with the advantage of the fact that the only time you play a 2-3 zone like them is when you play them, and you have to have that challenge of the discipline of playing against a team that dribble drives constantly throughout a game. But they obviously Syracuse had gone into last night's game with a 2-game winning streak that included that demoralizing still and always will be. I don't care if Virginia wins 5 national championships before I die in basketball. I'll never forget that Elite Eight game in 2016 that Virginia had a 15-point lead, 10 minutes to go, and Syracuse came back and won. And actually we saw sort of a microcosm of that almost play out last night. Virginia had a 14-point lead, minute 24 to go after 2 free throws by Devin Hall. And it felt comfortable. 64-50, Virginia was pulling away. Syracuse runs down, makes a quick shot. Virginia turns the ball over 3 straight possessions. 3 straight possessions, and Syracuse converts all 3 into baskets. Very similar to what happened in that 2016 Elite Eight game, where a perfect storm occurred, and Virginia had a couple turnovers. Syracuse made a couple threes. It got close, and Virginia kind of panicked. Now, Virginia didn't panic last night. It got to 64-59, so with 124 to go, it was a 14-point game. With 29 seconds to go, it was a 5-point game. 9-0 run in 55 seconds. And Virginia got the ball in bounds after the 3 turnovers, after the 7 straight points. Actually, 9 straight points when you include the first basket that started that run. Made a couple free throws and kind of closed the game out. They actually made 4 free throws in the last 29 seconds to close the game out, but it did have to run through Tony Bennett's mind, I suppose, that he may have been seeing what happened a couple years ago starting to happen again last night. So, but Virginia did hold on for the win, and some things to work on. Obviously, closing games out would be a thing to work on, and rebounding. 2 straight games now, Virginia's been out-rebounded, but not only out-rebounded on the offensive end. In fact, I ran the numbers, and over the last 2 games, Virginia's opponents have rebounded combined, and North Carolina, Syracuse have rebounded 50% of their misses. And Syracuse last night was actually over 50%. Carolina was just under 50%. And so, offensive rebounding or defensive rebounding in Virginia's case. Going into that Carolina game over the weekend, Virginia was 12th in the country defensive rebounding. Well, they've been exposed a bit. So something for Tony Bennett and his staff to work on. And it's nice to be able to work on these things and still win games against quality opponents. You beat North Carolina, you beat Syracuse, and you can kind of nitpick what you need to work on. Cavs' next game is Sunday at home, 6 o'clock start with North Carolina State. And last night we also saw the emergence of DeAndre Hunter. I say the continued emergence of DeAndre Hunter. He had a big game early this season against Monmouth, and then he had some quiet games. The last 3 games ACC play, the wins over Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Syracuse, he's actually averaging 13 points a game, which is a third on the team, but a very close third. Kyle Guy over the same stretch averaging 14 points a game. Devin Hall, same stretch, 13.7 points a game. And DeAndre Hunter off the bench, redshirt freshman, averaging 13 points a game. He had 15 last night, 13 in the first half. And the role he played last night, the Syracuse 2-3 zone, the one soft spot. And every defense has, it has its strengths and weaknesses. The soft spot of the 2-3 zone that Syracuse runs, because they like to close out on those three-point shooters, their perimeter guys, their wing guys, will cheat out towards the three-point line. It kind of leaves that middle right there at the foul line a little exposed. But it's easier said than done. You got to pass the ball to the high post. And you've got to have a guy there who has some height, because they've got height around him, and the ability to knock down either knock down that 12-foot, 15-foot jumper, pass the ball out to the perimeter guys if the defense crunches down on him, or drive to the basket. Well, Hunter did all three effectively last night en route to a 15-point performance, and was a key guy for this Virginia team. He had 13 in the first half. I mentioned Virginia in the first half just didn't play well, didn't shoot well. He came in the game 11:57 to go, scored the next 8 points to keep Virginia close, because at that stage, even after he scored the last bucket of that 8-point individual run, Virginia's still down 17-15. He also then scored the last 5 points of the half for Virginia to help Virginia get into the locker room with a 3-point lead. Very key that he was as on his game as he was in the first half last night. Second half, he only had the 2 points on 1 of 4 shooting. He missed what would have been a poster dunk of all time. Threw one down, hit the back iron, and it actually went in the front row. He was dunking it so hard. But largely what Syracuse did to take him out of what he was doing effectively in the first half was those wing defenders who would like to cheat out on three-point shooters started cheating in on him. What that did, he didn't actually record an assist in the second half, but because those guys were cheating in, it left some openings for Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, Devin Hall, who combined 6 of 15 on three-point attempts in the second half. And, 6 of 15 is 40%. You might say 40%, what's the big deal there? But when you account for the fact that three-pointers count for 3 points instead of 2, that's the equivalent of 60%. That's an effective field goal percentage of 60% on those shots. And that was a big part of Virginia's, very effective second half offensively. So DeAndre Hunter has emerged as a big option for this team. Now you look at this team. I mentioned Kyle Guy. He had 22 last night. He's been averaging 14 over the last 3 games. He had the 22 points last night. Leading scorer on the team, over 15 points a game. You got Devin Hall is averaging over 12 a game now. Ty Jerome is not even averaging double figures. He had 31 against Boston College in the ACC opener a couple weeks ago. But you've got, with Hunter's emergence, you've got really 4 guys who can score double digits for you on any given night. They can lead the team in scoring at any given night and really take the lead in game at any time. And I say 4 reliable guys. I mean, and not that other guys aren't reliable, but guys like Nigel Johnson, who had 23 in a win earlier. I think that was a Davidson game earlier this year. Isaiah Wilkins has led this team in scoring in a game this year. You've got 6 guys out there on the floor who can lead you in scoring. Mamadi Diakite, a 7th guy, who has had a few double-digit games this year. So, this is a team for Virginia with Hunter really stepping up his game this year. That is last year's team, of course, famous for being punchless. That 39-point effort in the loss in the second round of the NCAA tournament, we all remember that. And then the days afterwards, guys transferring out. Mariel Shayok transferred out. Darius Thompson transferred out. Jared Reuter transferred out. Things were bleak. I mean, you lose by 26 points in the second round of the tournament. You score 39 points in the game, and then guys are leaving. It feels like rats are jumping off the sinking ship. I'll tell you that a key reason that both Shayok and Thompson left is because they obviously saw DeAndre Hunter and what he can do. They practiced with that guy all last year. He's a redshirt freshman. They practiced with that guy all last year, and they, I'm sure, saw what we're now seeing from DeAndre Hunter coming. And the minutes are there for DeAndre Hunter. They probably wouldn't have been there for Shayok and Thompson. And this Virginia team is a different-looking team. You know me. You've been listening to these podcasts. If you've been listening to these podcasts on a regular basis, I've been saying since last March that even with those departures, even with the sort of depressing end of last season, I really thought this team this year was going to be a Final Four quality team. I assumed that Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy would step up the way they have. Guy's the leading scorer on the team. Jerome's a guy that had 31 points in that win over Boston College. He can score, in bunches at any point in time. Devin Hall has stepped up. And Isaiah Wilkins. Those two guys are fifth-year seniors, veteran leaders on this team. And this is a talented team, a deep team, a team that can score points. And I've been saying all along, I thought Final Four for this team. But what I didn't foresee was that DeAndre Hunter would emerge as quickly as he has. As a redshirt freshman, I was sort of thinking, hey, if he can do what Malcolm Brogdon did as a freshman, and we all remember, of course, Brogdon, the reigning NBA Rookie of the Year. We remember he was a 3-time first-team All-ACC guy, but that was after his freshman year. He actually played a freshman year, had a redshirt because of a medical issue his second year, and he was a 3-time first-team All-ACC performer, really in what would have been his third, fourth, and fifth years. I thought if we got out of DeAndre Hunter this year, what we got out of Malcolm Brogdon as a true first year several years ago, and what Brogdon averaged I think he averaged 6.9 points a game. He had moments, but on a consistent basis, and actually Hunter's averaging 6.8 points a game right now. But what we've seen out of him in ACC play, he's a guy that's going to, if he continues on his pace, he's going to be a double-digit guy this season. So I think it adds another dimension to this Virginia team, and. I already saw a high ceiling for this Virginia team. It might be a little higher as we continue to see this emergence of DeAndre Hunter. So exciting news for Virginia fans. Certainly, I know it's something that DeAndre Hunter's a guy that the NBA scouts are looking at. He's only going to redshirt freshman. He's a guy with a 6'7" guy with the ability to play in the post, ability to play on the wing, and he's great defensive abilities. It's going to be fun to see his development continue. So let's switch gears now. So we've talked to UVA sports. Again, the next game is 6 o'clock on Sunday. So we've got some time off between now and then. Scott German and I will be courtside at JPJ for that one. Live blog. We'll do a post-game wrap, Street Knowledge, live from courtside, Facebook Live, and, of course, all the post-game columns and such as we can bring. Switching gears, let's talk about that national championship game from Monday night. Let's talk 2 levels of this. Actually, maybe 3 levels of this. First level, we'll talk about the game itself. A game that played out very interestingly. Georgia dominates the first half, a 13-0 lead at the halftime break. And, it looked like, at halftime, it certainly looked like that the way the game was playing out. Georgia had over 200 yards of offense in the first half of that game. Alabama had just 95 yards, and a big part of that was Jalen Hurts. I tweeted towards the end of the second quarter, and I'll admit that I couldn't figure out why this was, but I tweeted about how it seemed like Alabama's brain trust had decided that for whatever reason they couldn't throw the ball down the field. Everything they were throwing was lateral, basically. Line of scrimmage, some wide receiver screens, bubble screens, action to the running backs. It was all at the line of scrimmage. What I couldn't determine just from watching, I couldn't tell if that was an issue of poor offensive line play. It didn't seem like that was the case, but maybe they were trying to prevent the offensive line from being an issue by throwing quick stuff. Or as it turned out, Nick Saban decided that the issue actually wasn't poor offensive line play, but it was a quarterback play. And now I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce the young man's name, Tua Tagovailoa, and that's the closest I'm going to get to trying this as far as that goes. You can hear my speakers on I'm trying to bring the stats up from the game. But as soon as Tagovailoa got in the game, Jalen Hurts was 3 of 8 for 21 yards. His first pass, Tagovailoa's first pass, was a deep over-the-middle pass that he just overshot his receiver, maybe by a half step. But you could tell already, hey, the play calling has changed with this guy in the lineup. The coaching staff feels like he can throw the ball down the field. And he finishes 14 of 24, 166, 3 touchdowns, including the 41-yarder in the overtime to win the game. But it was a different team. out there for Alabama when Tagovailoa was out there at quarterback. He still gave him the ability. I remember on his first drive after that incomplete pass, there was a 3rd and 7 on the minus side of midfield, just on the minus side of midfield, and Tagovailoa was under heavy pressure, and he actually broke a tackle right at the line of scrimmage as he was breaking free from the pocket, got the first down, continued the drive, led him to a touchdown on that drive. So, it was not Hurts, and what Hurts brought, it seemed, was with his 25-2 career record as a starter, what he seemed to bring to the team was the ability to gain yards on the run, and he did gain 47 yards rushing in the first half, most of that on a 31-yard scramble. But Tagovailoa had 27 yards himself, and that includes some sack yardage that came off. I know there was a big 16-yard loss right before the touchdown play in the overtime period. So, he was able to gain some yards with his feet to keep the chains moving with his feet. But what really was the difference, again, was just the ability to throw downfield and the offensive coaching staff's trust in him to throw the ball downfield. He did have a pass picked off. You would expect a true freshman who had seen no game action to have an issue there. I think that may have been the second series, maybe the third series that he was in the game for, and just an ill-advised pass into traffic, though it looked like it could have been an issue too, just miscommunication between quarterback and receiver. It looked like the receiver was thinking that Tagovailoa was running, and I'm sure I've mispronounced his name 20 times already. But it looked like maybe the receiver thought he was running and was already downfield blocking when the ball was in the air over his head. So that said, that Alabama team in the first half to second half, including the overtime, very, very different team. In fact, with Tagovailoa in the lineup, Alabama went from 95 yards in the first half. They finished with 371, so almost 300 yards offense with the new quarterback in. And so and Georgia seemed to rest on their laurels a bit. Still had a 20-10 lead going into the fourth quarter, and seemed intent in the fourth quarter with their first couple of possessions in that quarter, just trying to run the clock out. And it reminded me, I know a lot of folks listening to my podcast are UVA sports fans. The first thing that came to mind, even in the first drive where Georgia sort of had that issue, it reminded me of the George Welsh era at Virginia, where the one knock it seemed on Coach Welsh was that when he got a big lead, he tried to run clock too much in the fourth quarter games and take the air out of the ball. And I'm looking at those fourth quarter drives. Looking here real quick, the fourth quarter drives, 3 plays, 9 yards, 2:14 punt, 3 plays, 7 yards, 54 seconds punt. You just, and then Alabama responds. Actually, they had an early fourth quarter field goal, and then after the first punt, an 8-play, 66-yard drive, quick strike drive. Alabama actually had, if you might remember, they actually had a field goal attempt at the end that went wide left to win the game in regulation. So, you could take the air of the ball too soon, and I think Georgia certainly did that. They were trying to ice the clock instead of doing what they sort of got them there. Fourth quarter offense for Georgia, just at 16 yards of offense for the Bulldogs after having a pretty. And in fact, their one drive in overtime, a couple runs on first and second down, got a sack on third down, had to kick a 51-yard field goal just to get on the board in the overtime. So, very conservative approach, and that actually came back to bite them in the end. So, second level of the championship game then is the ratings. I expected, a lot of folks expected, because of the sectional nature of this game, 2 SEC teams playing, first time that 2 teams from a conference played in the national championship game, at least in this playoff era. We'd seen Alabama play LSU several years ago back in the BCS era. But it was expected because it was Georgia, Alabama. Only the Southeast might be interested in this game. You didn't have a team from the Midwest like an Ohio State to bring in the Chicago and Midwest markets. You didn't have a West Coast team perhaps to bring in the folks west of the Mississippi or Texas or anybody like that. So the expectation was ratings would be down. In fact, they weren't. They were. It was actually the second highest rated championship game of the playoff era. There's only been 4, so take that what it's worth. But an 18% improvement over last year's game, which featured Clemson and Alabama. And so, from a ratings perspective, game was a great success. And which brings in the third level of this, and I think these two kind of go together. Central Florida being left out. I think I expected if the ratings were down, a lot of folks talked about if the ratings were down, maybe that would force the college football playoff powers that be's hands into thinking through perhaps expanding the playoff. You know, the famous case this year of Central Florida being a team that finished, I believe they finished 14-0. I'm gonna have to go back real quick and verify that, but I think they finished 14-0. I know that they certainly outpaced Auburn, which is a key in this game. As far as this discussion goes, you know, I'm pulling this up real quick. Yeah, 13-0 UCF finished this year. Because Central Florida beating Auburn's a team that beat both those teams who played in the championship game, Alabama and Georgia. Georgia avenged its loss with the win in the SEC championship game, but Alabama lost the season finale, and actually that game wasn't even close. The final score was 26-14, but Auburn really dominated that game even more than that score would indicate. And UCF beat Auburn, so transitive nature. UCF's claiming national championship finished 13-0. They beat the team that beat the two teams, and going into the bowls, UCF was ranked 12th. So they may have even been on the outside looking in if a playoff was expanded to 8 teams. But certainly the thought process was, well, if this game doesn't get the ratings, then maybe we'll see the field expand. And I may talk more about this with Scott German later. We had a great discussion on the way over to the game last night, kind of going through the ins and outs of this. My thought has been, well, one, even before the playoff was enacted 4 years ago, I'd long been an advocate of moving towards a playoff. And we've got a 4-team playoff, so that's a start. I don't think that's the end. The 1AA, I'll still call them 1AA. I guess they're officially FCS, even though now both FCS and FBS have championship games, so they could both be FCS. The 1AA level has a 24-team playoff, and it's a 5-week scenario. Actually, there are 16 teams get buys into the second round, but the 8 teams have to. I think it's 16. Maybe it's 8 teams have buys in the second round. 16 teams have to play in the first round. Whatever the case may be, even teams who have that bye have to win 4 games to win the championship. And if you have to play that first weekend, you have to play 5 games perhaps to win the championship. So I'm trying to pull that up real quick to get a sense. So all I'm getting here is, let's see here real quick, 1AA football. Or maybe I should play FCS football because I'm sure Google wouldn't. Football rankings, here we go. So, if you have to play that many games, now the FCS level only plays, they only play the 11-week regular season. Let's go back to that real quick. So, 15 games. North Dakota State and JMU both played 15 games this year. So, the argument, and of course, we saw that Alabama actually only played 14 games this year. And Georgia would have played 15. Let's see, because Georgia finished 13-2. So the fact that, you could move some things around, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. I'm kind of stumbling through. Right now, with the addition of that 12th game several years ago at the FBS level, I'll go by the nomenclature that's acceptable to most folks. That addition to that 12th game, and then the Power Fives and even some of the non-Power Fives play a championship game. So that's a 13th game, and then if you had to play 2 playoff games, that's 15. If you took away the 12th game of the regular season and replaced it with a playoff, and actually took away the 12th game in the conference championship games, if you went 8 teams, the champions would still play 15, and everybody else would play either 12, 13, or 14. If you keep that championship game, you're probably going to go just to an 8-team tournament. I guess, bottom line, where I come from, the ultimate scenario to me would be that you would have a 16-team tournament. There are 10 FBS conferences. Winners of all 10 of those conferences get an automatic berth, kind of like the NCAA basketball tournament. Actually, or like the NCAA baseball tournament. If you win your conference, you get in. So that includes the Central Floridas. That includes the champion of the Sun Belt, the Conference USA, etc. If you win, you're in. You can argue that those non-Power Fives are going to get their heads kicked in, when they play Power 5 teams in that first round, but so be it. We have the same issue again in the NCAA tournament, and actually I think over the years what we've seen is that the ability to play on that even playing field in March, you do have those upsets. And the ability to play, have that limelight of playing in March Madness helps those smaller and mid-major schools recruit a little better. And so, they kind of it does narrow the playing field to a point where the haves and have-nots, that gap is diminished somewhat. And that's good. But if you have your 10 automatics and then you have 6 at-larges, that's the ultimate scenario for me. And what you do then is you have an 11-game regular season. I think you get rid of the conference championship games, just declare, or if you do have a conference championship game, recognize that your 2 teams who make it all the way through could play a 16th game. That's the way it's going to go. And the thing is that would make so much money. ESPN owns the rights to most bowl games now. In fact, they own several. I mean, when I say several, I mean in the I think it's in the 20s or 30s. They actually own the bowl games outright. Bowl games used to be owned by a nonprofit entity representing Shreveport, Louisiana, or whatever city or town they're located in, and they were organized by the local chamber of commerce, and it was just a way to get people to come from north to south at the end of December, first part of January, to watch a football game and get out of the cold, and spend a couple days, rent a hotel room, spend some money at restaurants. That was the purpose of a bowl game. Oh, by the way, we'll play a football game. Now ESPN owns most of the games that are played, and of course they're all exhibition games. The only games that count right now, even with just a 14 playoff, are those 3 games, those 2 games on semifinal, the semifinal day, and then the championship game. Every other game is a meaningless exhibition game. You can keep your meaningless exhibition games if you'd like. NIT still exists. There's a CBI tournament in college basketball. I think there's a college something.net tournament too. I mean, there's meaningless college basketball games as well, I guess is the point, in March. So if you want to keep your bowls, That's fine. Good. Go for it. But let's have some more meaningful football. And, the way to do – and I think actually what that would do too, I know some would argue that would kill the regular season. Man, if you had a 16-team tournament, what would that do to the regular season? I think it would make the regular season – it would make it such that you would see less games involving Power 5 teams and FCS teams, for example. I think you wouldn't see that weekend in November with the SEC scheduling the Cream Puffs, and now Florida State and Clemson have followed suit in recent years in the ACC, where you're basically protecting whatever ranking you've gotten to that point in mid to late November before your rivalry game at the end of the season. I think you'd see teams more likely to aggressively schedule, because if there's a 16-team tournament and you have 2 ways to get in, especially if you're a Power 5, win your conference championship or get an at-large bid, you can afford to lose 2 or 3 games over the course of a season and still play your way in. So you don't have to be as careful scheduling. Right now, if you're the ACC, for example, you've got 8 conference games already on your schedule. And if you're Virginia, for example, you've got 6 games against coastal teams. You've got 2 games against Atlantic teams. That leaves you 4 non-conference games. You want at least 1 marquee non-conference game. Virginia doesn't have one next year. Their 1 non-conference game against the Power 5 is at Indiana. 2 in 2019, they're actually at Notre Dame. But you want at least 1 game of that nature, but you also want a couple of easy ones because, not that Virginia's going to compete for a national championship anytime soon, but let's say you're Clemson and you play Florida State every year in your division. You play your 6 Atlantic games. You play 2 Coastals. You play South Carolina every year. They've recently been playing Auburn in a head-to-head. I'm not sure who they have coming up in the next couple of years, but they always schedule. So they already have South Carolina, which is a pretty competitive SEC program year in and year out. They'll schedule a second game. You've got to put a couple easy ones in there. You can't go out there every week and beat your head in when 1 loss can knock you away and 2 losses almost completely disqualifies you from a 4-team tournament. Now you can go out if you're Clemson and schedule a third tough non-conference game. And what's that mean for us, the fans? Hey, that's more good football. I mean, we don't want to see Clemson play Wofford. You know, we don't want to see the Citadel playing Florida State. Those games don't mean anything to anybody. Even to the players, they don't mean anything. They don't mean anything to the fans sitting in the stands. And so I think in the end, that's just the way we're going to see things go. It's not going to be soon, unfortunately, but it's going to be the way we see things go. So let's wrap the show up here with a little bit of wrestling talk. News that I just saw coming across the news wires as I was getting ready to do the show. Matt Hardy has finally made a deal with Anthem, the owner of Impact Wrestling, the former TNA, to acquire the rights to all his characters for the Broken gimmick. And that's significant because WWE in recent weeks has rolled out Woken Matt Hardy, a version of his Broken Matt Hardy that he'd come to fame in Impact and TNA with before he and his brother Jeff, excuse me again, made the jump to WWE back at WrestleMania earlier last year, I should say. Now it's 2018, yes. But what this means, it means that whatever full rollout now WWE wants to do with that very successful niche character can now happen. And in WWE, actually we saw some of it playing out Monday night. I didn't get to watch much of it because I was so engrossed in the championship game, but I did see an interaction again with Hardy and Bray Wyatt. Be interesting to see where that heads down the line. But this is big news. I think it's for fans who came to really enjoy that Broken universe that Matt and Jeff, brother Nero, had created. Looking forward definitely to seeing how that plays out now. The other thing I'd bring up is Chris Jericho. My friend Brian Gokenauer and I, Brian Gokenauer will tell you, I've got a book coming out hopefully soon about my experiences working in the wrestling industry the last few years. I'm now away from it, so and I'm not sure if I'll ever get back into it at this stage, but had some great experiences in the wrestling business. Brian, when we were kids growing up, he was the guy who brought me to be a fan of wrestling as a kid. He and I don't get to talk as much as we'd like, being as busy as you get. But and in fact, I'm going to one day pull Brian into doing a podcast with me talking wrestling because the dude, I know a lot of wrestling. This guy knows the rest of it. So between the two of us, we'll cover it all, right? We discuss a lot by text, though, and we text an awful lot about wrestling. And we both sort of talked each other into downloading and paying for the monthly fee for the New Japan app. Definitely recommend it if you're a big wrestling fan. It'll change your world if you download this app. So last week's show, Jeff Fife and I talked about it. The New Japan Wrestle Kingdom 12. One of the co-main events was Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega. Great match. If you might have been able to see it. If you don't have the New Japan app, you might have been able to see it on Access TV last week. Mark Cuban's network bought the rights to the broadcast rights, U.S. broadcast rights. Definitely worth the watch. It's worth the $9.11 per month. It's 999 yen, which is about $9.11 per month. It's worth that to download the app, Fire Stick, Roku, whatever you do, PlayStation, whatever you do, to watch some New Japan stuff. And plus, their archives are tremendous. Gosh, there's AJ Styles, Shinsuke Nakamura, Finn Balor back when he was known as Prince Devitt, the Bullet Club, Gallows and Anderson now in WWE, and I'm just, of course, the guys who were there, like Omega and the Young Bucks. I mean, this and all the Japanese wrestlers, Okada and Naito. It's just tremendous level wrestling. So Brian and I, getting back to where I was going with this, Brian and I discussing the Jericho Omega match. We both sort of lamented to each other that. We hope what this didn't mean was that, okay, so New Japan and WWE has some sort of deal where WWE will loan Chris Jericho to New Japan, and then Kenny Omega is going to show up at Royal Rumble. And the reason we say that is, if you're a New Japan fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not, the New Japan version of wrestling is so much more. I mean, if you're a hardcore wrestling fan, if you were a wrestling fan back in the 80s and 90s, and not so much of this new era where it's a little too soap opera for a lot of our liking. We tolerate it because you have to, but the New Japan stuff is I mean, there's soap opera to it. There's storylines, there's characters, but that's not the primary focus of that wrestling. The primary focus is the in-ring action, and it's top-notch. And the idea that Kenny Omega, who is, if he's not the best wrestler in the world, the best wrestler in the world is Okada, and then Omega is a very, very, very close second. The idea that Omega would then wrestle in WWE and have to subsume himself within that culture that's more soap opera-oriented would be depressing to fans of Kenny Omega that, like Brian and I, have become. So we were we were very hopeful that this Jericho thing wasn't a one-off, and that we would be unpleasantly surprised to see Omega as a surprise entrant in the Royal Rumble. Well, I think we don't have to worry about that anymore. The follow-up show to the Wrestle Kingdom appearing on the New Japan Network a couple days after the event, Jericho attacked Naito, and that's going to be the next feud in New Japan. Also, Kenny Omega worked out his next dance partner, and so that's good. I mean, we've got. If you're a fan of New Japan, Jericho is going to be there for a while, it seems, and that's interesting in and of itself. Jericho, 47 years old, and the WWE style seems to work better for him, especially the part-time nature of his work there the last couple of years. The Japanese style is very intense. It's the match he had with Omega went 35 minutes. And it was not 35 minutes of rest holds. It was 35 minutes of chair shots, tables breaking, numerous suplexes going back and forth. I mean, a lot of bumps, a lot of hard bumps that even young guys would need some time to recover from. And Jericho, at his advancing age, put on a great match with Omega. And I guess maybe he caught the bug, but. Good news is that Jericho has a longer run in New Japan, and it's probably bad news for fans of Fozzy. Actually, now that I think about it, but bad news for fans of Jericho and the list in WWE. But for fans who want to see Jericho in New Japan, it's definitely good news. So tomorrow, we recorded this podcast. If you're listening to it the day of, it's Wednesday. Tomorrow, Thursday, Jeff Fife will be back here in the studio with me, and Jeff and I will talk. We'll probably talk more UVA Syracuse. We may rehash some of the talk about college football. We'll see where that goes, but get you ready also for UVA and NC State. And we'll see what else we get into. And I hope to get Scott German back maybe for Friday. And he and I, in addition to further preview of that UVA NC State game. Scott and I were having some fun conversations last night. So the drive there, we're talking college football. The drive back, we're talking baseball, and we'll talk some hot stove baseball, some Nats, some O's, and see what else we can get into again. So that's one of my favorite things to say, I guess. Signing off for the night, it's Chris Graham, Street Knowledge. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to wish everyone a great night.